European colonizers justified slavery through the Bible. There was this idea that biblically, through the story of Noah's curse, Africans were meant to be slaves. But black slaves also went on to adopt Christianity and make it into a faith for survival and mobilization. What we know as the black church today formed through what happened during slavery and the period after it. Now, slaveholders didn't really want their slaves to be exposed to Christianity. There was a fear that by exposing them to it, they'd see themselves as, well, equal to the slaveholder since they would share the same faith. So they adjusted their faith's teachings. The version of Christianity that slaveholders spread usually mandated a divinely ordained racial hierarchy, that slavery was God's will for people of African descent. And it's not like the stolen Africans didn't have their own spiritual traditions before they were enslaved in the colonies. I'll let Dr. Judith Weisenfeld of Princeton University explain.
Enslaved Africans were not interested in converting to Christianity, for example. Enslaved peoples produced religious community on their own, maintaining connections to African traditional resources and creating new versions of those.
Their own beliefs include a variety of traditional religions in West Africa and Central Africa, but also Islam and Christianity, and they ended up practicing their faith in secret gatherings. But in the 1740s, decades before the United States even existed, a wave of religious enthusiasm among European Protestants spread across the colonies. It's known as the Great Awakening. The Christian revivals, as they were called, focused on renewed individual piety and religious devotion, and they had a more egalitarian message than the one that slaveholders espoused.
People felt free to interpret the scripture and the teachings of Christianity for themselves in ways that highlighted their humanity, their equal standing before God, and the notion that God would someday liberate them. And so we begin to see new forms of African American Christianity emerge that are focused on this experience of being born again and on a more direct access that doesn't require the oversight of white clergy.
It's out of this movement that you start to see the emergence of black leaders. A lot of them came out of the Baptist and Methodist denominations because those denominations actually licensed black men to preach. And Weisenfeld says sometimes religion even provided tools for slave revolts. One of the most famous examples that comes much later is that of Nat Turner, a religious missionary and preacher who led a rebellion in Virginia in August of 1831. Now, back in the late 1700s, free black people in the North had already begun to develop their own denominations. In many cases, these denominations were in direct response to the racism black Americans experienced in their predominantly white congregations. But it wasn't until after the Civil War and the end of slavery that newly freed black people who were part of the Baptist churches and communities in the South were able to organize more formally.